Okay, everybody, we should be live. Welcome everybody to our Bolton live stream. If you can hear me, let me know in the chat. Let me know if the sound is good. Let me know if you see me, Peter, Alexander. You should see us all on the screen. So let me know if you guys are getting the feed. Okay, let me know in the chat. Welcome to a live stream where we will focus on the mustache, the stash, John Bolton getting fired.
The Mark Twain of regime change.
That's right. Getting fired by Trump. He says he resigned. Trump says you're fired. All right, let's see where people are coming to us from. Let's see. Is everything all right in the chat, guys? Let me know if you can hear me. If you heard Peter as well. All right, sound is great. Super. Thank you, Liberty, for that. All right, looks like we're ready to roll. So where's everyone joining us from here today? From Copenhagen. Sound is good. Greetings from Sweden, Pax Bella. How are you, Pax Bella? From Northamptonshire. All right, Colin. Nice to have you here. Hello from
Northamptonshire.
Northamptonshire, yes. From France, Switzerland. All right. I think we have some people as well from Melbourne and Sydney. Black Hundreds from Russia. Hello from Russia. Thailand, Germany, Paris, Yorkshire. Hello, Helen. Good morning to you. From Australia, Tanzania, England, Slovenia, Hawaii. Aloha, Kenneth. Nice to have you here. From Stafford, Canada, New Swabia. Hello, Romeo. From Cambodia, France, England, Canada, Australia, UK. All right. From Maui. All right. 2 people from Hawaii. That's awesome. From Ireland. Hello. From Warsaw. Your old home, Peter. Poland. Huh?
Yeah.
That's right. Queensland, Austria, Ireland, Holland, Oregon, Netherlands. Netherlands again, Newcastle. All right, let's get rolling. We have in Moscow the host of RT's Crosstalk, Mr. Peter Lavelle. Peter, how are you doing in Moscow? You guys have great weather. You were telling me before we started the live stream. Yep. What's the word?
It's everything is great. John Bolton screwed up my recording yesterday, and we did a crosstalk on Trump's foreign policy in the Middle East. It was I thought it was quite entertaining to do. And then as soon as I got home, I got a ton of messages. Bolton's resigned, so I had to call my production team and tell them to put recorded in the date, okay? Because I don't want to sound like we're outdated. We just, living in Moscow, we're ahead of the news all the time. We're finishing when the U.S. is getting started. So every once in a while we get burned like that. Though I do suggest people go and watch the program. It's very interesting. We didn't even actually mention Bolton from what I remember, but nonetheless, that's the way the news cycle works. Sometimes you're ahead of it, and sometimes you get screwed by it.
It's a foreign policy game changer for sure. All right, hello from Greece. How are you doing in Greece, Brazil, North Carolina, Serbia? And we have in London, Alexander Mercurs, the Oracle of London. Alexander, you have a very nice ambiance, a nice lighting scheme going on there. I like it. How you doing, Alexander?
I'm very well, also very happy. In fact, we were clicking champagne glasses last night when we heard that Bolton had gone. I'm going to proceed our program by making that disclosure. And my wife actually has tweeted a picture of this, but there we are.
All right.
So some tipsy tweets. Okay?
Tipsy tweets, yes.
Celebrating Bolton's departure.
Well, I'm not really sure celebration is real. I mean, we can enjoy the moment, but
we enjoy the moment.
It has a whole lot to do with who's going to replace him. This General Keane, I've heard about. He's a pretty hardcore guy. Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, Brian Hook, Captain Hook, of the State Department fame of emailing the captain of one of those tankers, trying to bribe him. I mean, this is what American foreign policy's gotten down to. So he's being tipped there. We have this young guy, what's his name, Avi Berkowitz. He's going to take over as Middle East envoy. Maybe he'll get it. He'll just go straight to the top. A 30-year-old guy that last week was making coffee for Jared Kushner. So lots of fun stuff ahead. But of course, I'm quite relieved that Bolton is gone. We've all said from the very beginning that his appointment was the worst nightmare we could actually imagine. This is the worst guy for the job. and it proved to be that way. But he left a lot of damage. And gentlemen, and our viewership, our dear viewership, Bolton has a lot of information. Expect a lot of leaking. And I suspect that was one of the reasons why Trump got rid of him. He was a notorious leaker. And now he's going to continue his path of rampage. He's angry. He's not a nice guy. This guy does not have love in his heart. Okay.
He's vindictive.
He's a hammer in search of nails, and he's not done.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, he's vindictive. Just to also point out, though, Peter, apropos of our champagne yesterday, we've not had much good news in England. So finding something to celebrate has been something.
Count your tender mercies. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. So Pamela is saying that she's wearing her Duran t-shirt as she's watching this live stream. So guys, go to the Duran shop and pick up a t-shirt. That really helps this channel out. And please donate to us on PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar. You'll find the links in the description box down below. And we will post this this live stream. We'll get this one and the one we did yesterday. We'll get them on SoundCloud and iTunes as well for those people that want to listen to the audio podcast of this show. And hit that like. Did I say to hit the like? Smash the like. Get the word out about the Duran. Help us get to 100,000 subs. We're close. We're about 10K short. So help us get to 100K. Peter, I see a lot of people are saying Afghanistan was the final straw. I'm seeing in the chat.
Yeah,
was it the thing that sent Bolton packing?
I think it's fair to say at this point in time, we still have this afterglow of the news, but that might have been the straw that broke the camel's back. But it also stands as a perfect example of the role of obstruction that Bolton was famed for during his 18 months tenure. Trump doesn't have one foreign policy victory at all. And a lot of it has to do with Bolton, I would say. And I've already said here, not only did Bolton, I mean, Bolton is a bureaucratic tapeworm, okay? He knows how the system works. He knows how to game it, okay? He's very good at it too. I mean, don't get me wrong, but he played a fundamental role in torpedoing North Korea, this latest thing with Afghanistan, almost going to war with Iran. Those are John Bolton's fingerprints all over that. And Trump's firing of Bolton has just as much to do with his re-election prospects as well. Bolton was not popular among the base. As a matter of fact, he's really part of the liberal elites. Okay, even though he has worked in Republican White Houses, he's very much part of the foreign policy blob, and he's the most flamboyant of them all. But there's a lot of other people like him. And if you look at the people that lamented his leaving, I mean, that should tell you a lot. And it was a lot of Republicans as well, okay? And I'm sorry, Democrats. When you just take a ride through history of 18 months ago, there were all these Democrats were saying, oh, this is a terrible thing. This is a terrible thing. And then as soon as he's fired, they say this is a terrible thing. So, I mean, they keep saying Trump doesn't have any consistency in foreign policy. That may be true, but his opposition doesn't have any consistency as well. So the legacy is going to definitely hurt Trump. And I think Trump sees people like Tulsi, our good friends in Hawaii. You know, Tulsi, you know, these public opinion polls are underestimating her. I mean, there's some polls that have her beating Kamala Harris. They're the left's one of their favorites. Yeah. And so Trump, he knows. I mean, for his foreign policy is a disaster as far as I'm concerned, but he got himself elected president of the United States against all the odds. And he wants that job for another 4 years. And he's looking around, and I'm sure the popularity of Tulsi, I mean, she's all on alternative media, and look at the hits. I mean, she grabs attention, okay? Even though they're doing the Bernie effect on her, but she has traction with a lot of people that are interested in these issues, and Trump knows it, okay? So he has to repair the damage if he can. Now, if he replaces Bolton with, you know, a Brian Hook or somebody like that, then it's just a change of face, and he's going to have to face the same problems here. But Afghanistan, maybe, yes, by the way, I want to just make my observation here. This whole inviting the Taliban to Camp David, I don't really believe the story at all. You really think the Taliban would get on an American plane? And that plane would take them right to Gitmo, okay? The thing is, this whole argument has been terribly constructed. You can't trust the Taliban. Don't even talk to them. I mean, just go, all right? Okay, and you know what? Let the neighborhood take care of it, okay? Everyone in Afghanistan and around Afghanistan has a stake in this. As long as the U.S. has a presence there's that huge excuse, okay, not to deal with this problem, okay? Once the U.S. leaves, it will be resolved one way or another. Oh, and by the way, the events of 9/11, the planning happened in Germany and in Florida. It didn't come from the caves of Afghanistan. This is such a stupid media myth, a myth of the elites, okay? So, you know, we have to fight them there or we'll have to fight them at home. This ridiculous argument people make. And it shows you just how vacuous the thinking is about foreign policy. Get out of Afghanistan now. All of the American troops now, and other NATO countries, get out now. 18 years is enough.
Alexander, what do you think Bolton's departure means for Iran? What does it mean for the oil markets, the markets in general? How do you see things playing out here?
Well, the immediate response of the oil markets to the news that Bolton had been sacked, and let's be quite clear, he's been sacked, is that the oil price fell. Because, of course, what they're looking at is, and what people are hoping for, is that there's now going to be a easing of tensions with Iran, and that this talk about a Rouhani-Trump summit meeting is actually going to materialize. It's actually going to get traction and might even happen. I've been very skeptical about it, but I mean, you know, now I
think it's going to happen.
Yes, now it's suddenly looking possible. I mean, if I can just say, I mean, the thing for me about Bolton is that he was consistently thwarting Donald Trump's foreign policy. I mean, what Donald Trump wants, as Peter rightly says, is to get re-elected in 2020. He wants a big foreign policy achievement. He wants it either with North Korea or with Iran or with Afghanistan or in Syria. He wants to be able to tell the American people, I've ended the war, I've solved a mess that I've inherited from Obama and from Bush and Clinton and Hillary Clinton, and this is my achievement, and that's why you should re-elect me. And what Bolton was consistently doing is that Trump was going to meeting Kim Jong-un, or he was negotiating, or he was trying to sort of set up arrangements for a deal with Iran, or he was wanting to do a deal with Putin on other things, or whatever, or Afghanistan. And here Bolton would come along and he'd plant a bomb under it. And I think the final point came when Donald Trump said, enough, I can't go on with a situation anymore where my own national security advisor is sabotaging my foreign policy and my prospects of re-election because he's got some obsessive idea that the United States must always advance and never retreat anywhere in relation to anything. And I'm not signed up to this extraordinary foreign policy of his. And I'm not going to jeopardize my own re-election prospects and my own foreign policy for John Bolton's obsessions. And I think Donald Trump understands that John Bolton is a dangerous man and that he will go on Fox News or wherever and start saying all sorts of horrible things. But I think Trump has decided that on balance, in fact, I don't think there's any question about this, far better have this man out than have him in where he's going to go on doing more and more damage. Now, if you read Donald Trump's tweets of yesterday, when he announces that John Bolton has been sacked, and I really want to make that clear, he has been sacked. I mean, I thought the thing that came across to me was the sheer anger there. Yeah. When he says strong disagreements, not just with me, but with other people in the administration, and the kind of thanks he extends to Bolton, it's so perfunctory. It's almost, what we say in England, damning with the faintest of praise. I mean, he was furious with Bolton, and obviously it's been a cumulative thing. I'm sure lots of things have made Trump angry. The fact that he was dragged into a regime change operation in Venezuela, which hasn't succeeded either, and which has involved him in another crisis where he didn't want to be. I think all these things taken together, but Afghanistan, I think, was the final straw. Whether there was going to be a summit meeting in Camp David or not, I always thought that was a fanciful idea, but that's another story. The fact is, Donald Trump wants to end a war somewhere, and John Bolton was stopping him.
You know, the interesting thing is that what John Bolton did was that it was antithetical, in my mind, to how Trump actually thinks. Is that Trump was given by Bolton no options. It was always it had a logic of itself going escalating, no de-escalation, no reverse. And Trump his mind doesn't work that way. I mean, in all fairness, I mean, he's a real showman, okay? He's good at it too, okay? I'm not sure it lends well to foreign policy, but maybe we could talk about that later. But the thing is that Trump wasn't given options to excel at what he does best, and that's selling an idea, okay? And Bolton constantly, on every single issue, never allowed that to happen. And I think that was really the frustration. I mean, look, does Trump have a deep knowledge of what's going on with the history of U.S.-Iranian relations? I seriously doubt it. But he also sees an opportunity for him, Donald Trump, to come out on top. And that's what he cares about. And Bolton always delimited him on every single issue that he felt that he could make a difference on, particularly the Korean Peninsula. And historians will look back and see this was such a terrible missed opportunity. Would it have worked? I don't know, but it was certainly worth trying. And Bolton made sure that that option wasn't even viable. And I think that's what frustrated Trump. And of course, Bolton populated the national security apparatus with his clones, okay? And so you have all of these bottlenecks. So we need Douglas McGregor or somebody like that to be able to come in and clean house. Ron Paul would be wonderful. Our good friend Daniel McAdams, I hope he watches this, because he'll be complimented. Rand Paul, people like this, which would give the president of the United States viable options, not just policy preferences.
Yeah, I think we're all worried as to who's going to take over for Bolton, and we hope it's not another Bolton clone. I know Tucker mentioned that in his open last night during his show, that the worry now is that you're going to have a Bolton clone. That's what we should be focusing on.
Yeah, but I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, this morning I did a comparison. So I watched Tucker, Laura, and Hannity. As far as I could tell, Hannity didn't even mention it.
He stayed away.
So, I mean, that's a red face right there. Laura, I thought, did such a lame reaction to it. After watching her, listening to her comments, what does she really think? You really don't know. Okay?
She says she admired Bolton.
Yeah.
Something along those lines.
Yeah. It was really, sloppy for her. Okay. But good. Tucker Carlson came out like a raging bull and just nailed it. I mean, he killed it. And he did such a wonderful job, okay? Yeah. He had an opening, okay? And he did it. And what I did like is he brought an old clip when Bolton was on his program, and they really parlayed, and the mustache man was in the losing end.
Absolutely. Alexander and Peter, let's talk about something that you guys mentioned in the tweet. Actually, Alexander, you mentioned it in the tweet that Trump sent out, where he said that it wasn't only that Bolton was in disagreement with Trump, but with other people in the White House. Who do you think other people are? Maybe Pompeo, maybe Kushner. Where do you think Bolton was causing friction?
Well, Pompeo probably had champagne also.
No doubt of it. I mean, Pompeo and Bolton are known not to like each other. I mean, the fact that Pompeo is...
Even though they align
on certain things, But I think also that Pompeo was finding it extremely difficult to get on with Bolton. I mean, can I just say this? I mean, first of all, whoever replaces Bolton is not going to be a Bolton clone. He may be a neoconservative and a hardliner, but Bolton is one of a kind. No one has this sort of demented brilliance, you know, for wrecking that Bolton does. I mean, can I just say,
maybe Max Boot.
Well, maybe Max Boot, but I mean, I don't think even Max Boot, because Max Boot doesn't. I mean, people like this don't have this
dumb.
Dumb, exactly. I mean, to give an example. I mean, for me, the most extraordinary event of all was the summit with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. Here you have the president of the United States. He's made a huge investment in time and effort to build a relationship with the North Korean.
And prestige.
And prestige. And they have this summit in Hanoi. And the summit is not only wrecked, but John Bolton arranges for a North Korean embassy to be invaded by people who are clearly connected with the United States whilst that summit is ongoing. I mean, that is incredible behavior.
You're talking about the incident in Spain.
Absolutely. That is incredible behavior. Nothing like that has ever happened, to my knowledge, in US foreign policy. And it's very difficult to imagine anyone else doing something like that. There was an extraordinary article written in the American Conservative, which is actually very good on foreign policy, when Bolton was appointed. And it said, its title was "A Madman in Charge of the National Security Council." And that is exactly how it was, I think, with Bolton. I mean, there was a sort of mad brilliance about it. There was a method to the madness, but I mean, it was incredibly destructive. And I can easily imagine that even very hardline, very neoconservative people who are not necessarily approving of some of the president's foreign policy are going to be absolutely outraged at the way in which this individual was conducting and managing things and was basically wrecking the foreign policy of the United States. I mean, there was something profoundly treacherous about it. And it's that kind of treacherousness doesn't just affect the president. It must affect lots of other people. I doubt that John Bolton has many friends in the government after these last 18 months.
Mm.
Peter, do you think Trump should be worried about Bolton now going to the media and leaking? You mentioned it. Do you think that's something that worries the White House, that Bolton's going to now go on CNN and MSNBC and just start divulging all kinds of stuff, true or not true? Just start feeding the media?
I'm sure it's a concern, but I'm sure that Trump and his closest circle probably had, calculated that. It's in the mix. Okay, yeah, I'm fully expecting. I'm sure he's getting contracts on a lot of different media outlets right now. He's a vengeful man. He wants the story to be told. He wants to make some money off of it too. And there's still, that constituency, that hardcore, fanatical, anti-Iran part of the foreign policy establishment is still there, and he will still be their lightning rod. So I mean, he's out of a position of power, but he still has a position of influence. But he has to be careful, because I mean, if he really wants to look like sour grapes, he can do that. Okay, it's Alexander Kiris put it really well. I mean, there is a method to his madness. Okay, but if his hatred, he's blinded by his hatred for what happened to him, and it's his own fault. He could hurt himself as well. And on top of it, I mean, Bolton has to know that Trump never leaves one insult alone. I mean, so Trump he'll come out with his battering iron, and he's going to be on Twitter, and he's going to fire back. Okay, So is that what Bolton wants? It'll be very interesting. I mean, we'll both be calculated and let this thing rest, or it could go completely the other direction, and it could be just a real slugfest in public. But John Bolton won't do himself any favors by doing that. He'll look like a sore loser.
Yeah.
My own view
Yeah,
about
good.
this, my own view is that yes, John Bolton will do all sorts of things. You go on to all sorts of newspapers and TV shows and say all sorts of horrible things about Donald Trump, and it won't change a single vote. At least it won't lose Trump a single vote.
I agree with that.
It might actually, if anything, improve Donald Trump's position. I mean, frankly, for people to, for liberals to actually try and use Bolton, of all people, to have a go at Trump, it is so upside down and so weird that I think that it will just lose them credibility. I mean, it will make.
I think you're right, but then again, you know, over the last 3 years, we've seen such strange bedfellows. Yeah. Okay, I mean, you know, CNN or MSNBC, you know, has a contract with them. It will backfire on them. It will short circuit. It will short circuit.
I mean, it will lose them votes. It won't lose Trump votes. I mean, that's the point I'm trying to make. I mean, I don't think Bolton can actually do Trump any damage at all. I think also by now, Donald Trump's electoral base are frankly so accustomed to attacks on Trump that frankly, as far as they're concerned, any more from Bolton are just not.
And I think they're happy that he's gone too. Well, I think his base is happy.
Oh.
Yeah. All right. Let's get to some super chats, guys, which actually one of them follows up on a question that I want to get to you. It's from Toilet Sauce. It says, Trump, you are fired. Bolton, you can't fire me. I quit. More importantly, who will replace Bolton and how long will he last? So let's get into who you guys actually think will replace him. You mentioned Rand Paul. You mentioned Ron Paul. Who else here? Douglas McGregor, I know, has been mentioned by various people, and he's on Tucker Carlson a lot. But realistically speaking, who do you guys think will be on the short list?
Well, why don't we do it this way? Instead of trying to name names, let's try to build a profile here. I don't think Trump wants a showboat in front of him. I think when Trump's in the room, he has to be the center of attention. And Bolton stole his fire way too many times. Okay. And I don't think, well, obviously Trump doesn't like that. He's an egomaniac. Okay. So he's not going to have someone that's going to be very high profile and someone that's going to probably shun the media. He won't be showing up on Chris Wallace every other weekend. Okay. I think that's the kind of person he wants. And I think obviously he wants somebody that's more in tune with how he sees the world. How he sees the world is always open to debate. Okay. But certainly, and he should have known it. I mean, he hired Bolton because he saw him on Fox News so often. I mean, let's face it, okay? You know, so I guess maybe our profile should be someone that appears on Fox News a lot, okay? And that Douglas McGregor does come to mind. But I think it's going to be somebody that is going to be more demure and somebody that's not going to outshine Trump, and somebody that's going to be a much more show as a servant of the president, okay, and not a power base in and himself. And Bolton did that a lot.
I think Trump has been very unlucky with his national security advisors. I mean,
HR has had a huge HR problem.
Yeah, Michael Flynn, who I think was generally loyal to him, and with whom they saw eye to eye. I mean, self-destructed very quickly, and of course he was also brought down by a very, very shady deep state plot, but I don't think there's any prospect of him coming back. McMaster seems to have seen his job as basically treating Trump as some kind of idiot in the room who you have to run things round, and I think Trump finally had enough with that. And then he hit on hit on Bolton, who, as I said, turned out to be frankly a madman, a madman with method, but nonetheless somebody who was actively sabotaging Donald Trump's foreign policy and Donald Trump's prospects of re-election. I think Trump is going to consult as widely as he can. And I think he probably, at this moment in time, still doesn't know whom he's going to appoint to the National Security Council. What I will say is this. I mean, it's very interesting that at the time when there was this prospective missile attack on Iran, which Trump pulled back on at the last moment, it seems that amongst the people he was talking to, it was Tucker Carlson of all people. So, you know, who knows? Maybe Tucker Carlson will be one of the people.
I have a crazy idea, crazy thought. Okay, it looks like General Michael Flynn might have his case thrown out because of government malfeasance. Okay, and thank God Sidney Powell, one of America's greatest lawyers, she's really amazing, and she's taken this case. I wouldn't be surprised pro bono. And I think there's a chance, and maybe a likely chance, that the case against him is going to be completely thrown out, because we have to remember Flynn was Trump's first National Security Council advisor. Okay, I mean, maybe we'll keep the space open for him. Okay, because General Flynn's going to need some money. He's broke. Okay, the government targeted him and broke him. Okay, with no evidence of malfeasance whatsoever. This is such a disgusting episode. And I'm not cheerleading for Flynn. I think his views like on Iran I found to be very disturbing. But Trump has had very bad luck in this area, and he better think carefully, because the argument that the left is making right now, and I just did a quick review of it, chaos in this White House, which is one of their favorite themes. Well, Trump needs to get some really solid hands in his National Security Council to deal with his reelection. Okay, and that first and foremost on his mind.
Do you think, Peter Alexander, that's an interesting point about Flynn? Do you think that Flynn kind of discouraged Trump psychologically, in that he got taken out so quickly and so viciously that it kind of sent Trump on a trajectory to appoint generals and neocons and war hawks to kind of appease this deep state? Maybe he thought, this Russiagate thing will die down, or if I appease them, they'll, call off the attack dogs.
Yeah, well, but that's why in our vocabulary today, appeasement is a very negative word, because when you appease aggressive behavior, it only becomes more aggressive. So that's not the approach. What he needs to do, see, the problem is that this deep state, I mean, they all know each other. It's all interconnected. They all do well by the status quo. And having someone from the outside, like a Douglas McGregor, I mean, he could be a wonderful national security advisor, but would he have any power within the bureaucracy? Okay, and to answer your point, you're right. I mean, Trump wanted someone that understood the bureaucracy, how it works. The problem is that these people that not understand how it works have a very specific ideological disposition about how they think the world should work and America's role in it. Okay, and Trump can't cut that Gordian knot. Okay, that's why instead of trying to find names, we have to find a profile and see what might work for him in the future. As we said before this podcast privately, this is really big news. It's an opportunity for Trump to start righting some of the terrible wrongs that's happened during his administration, and he better not screw it up. It's like the Republicans voting on Kavanaugh. This is a singular moment. Don't screw it up.
Yeah, to answer your question, Alex, I think the Flynn affair, the sacking of Flynn, was the single most disastrous episode of the entire Donald Trump presidency. I mean, it happened right at its start. It gave massive traction to the Russiagaters. I mean, it really got Russiagate. It enhanced Russiagate incredibly, because, of course, everybody thought that it was somehow connected to Flynn's discussions with the Russian ambassador. And we now know that, in fact, the Department of Justice had actually exonerated Flynn of any actual collusion with Russia, and that this was actually concealed from Flynn himself. And that's what Powell is now arguing, that this is, in fact, proves that he should never have been convicted, because he was not provided with material that actually exonerated him. So, but I mean, I think the whole affair was disastrously handled by an extremely inexperienced president, as he then was. And I think Trump was deeply shocked by it. He went first for what he thought was a safe pair of hands, who was General McMaster, who was, as I said, this military man. And there was a period of time where the entire government seemed to be staffed with military men. We had General Mattis in defense, we had McMaster at the National Security Council, we had another general, I've forgotten his name, who was the president's chief of staff. We had all these generals surrounding Trump. General Kelly. We had all these generals surrounding Trump. And then, as I said, he then tried to break out of that. He brought in Pompeo and Bolton. And I think Bolton has also proved to be a disaster. And now I think he's going to try and find somebody more attuned to himself, as he's now a far more experienced president than he was at the time of the Flynn affair, and has a much better understanding of things. I don't think it can be General Flynn, because I mean
I said that's hyperbole. Okay.
I mean, if anything else, there's a problem with timing, because the hearing which may end in the quashing of his conviction isn't going to happen before the 18th of December, and Trump needs a head of a national security advisor before then. But who it will be, I am not really so sure. But whoever it will be, as I said, I think he's much more experienced in Washington politics now than he was in early 2017. And I think he has a better understanding of who his friends are, his true friends are in Washington, and who his true enemies are in Washington.
The interesting thing is that Jim Comey, I mean, in a moment of clairvoyance, I suppose, and honesty, he took advantage of the inexperience, in his own words, inexperience of the Trump administration as they were getting started. And they pulled the FBI pulled a fast one on Flynn. And Flynn shouldn't have, Flynn was an operator for 30 years. He should have been more careful in realizing what he was getting into. And remember Sally Gates? Oh my God! I mean, she made it sound like Flynn was the Manchurian candidate. I mean, it was hysterical. She was hysterical in front of Congress, and that's what kicked off this ridiculous hoax. It's lasted about 3 years.
Yes,
okay? You're right. The terrible mistakes were made in the very, very beginning.
I'm going to just say something very quickly about Flynn, because I've been very critical of the way Flynn handled things. But I think the more we've learned about that affair, the more clear it's become that Flynn was actually set up in the most appalling way. I mean, his meeting with the FBI, when he's supposed to have lied to the FBI, he wasn't made aware in advance that this is actually a formal interview. He met the two FBI agents, one of whom, by the way, was Peter Strzok, in a very, very informal setting. Basically, he had what he thought was a friendly conversation with them. And then they went away and turned it round and made out that he'd lied to them. And I think this was a very cynical and carefully planned setup by people like Comey, Sally Yates, who was the person who was bringing up these bizarre stories about Flynn being blackmailed by the Russians and breaching the Logan Act. And I mean, nonsensical, hysterical stuff. But of course, one has to remember how hysterical the atmosphere was in early 2017. But I think that looking back on it, it looks as if a lot of the things that Flynn was being criticized for, his misjudgments, weren't really misjudgments at all. They were simply people actually manipulating the situation to make it look like he'd behaved badly when he hadn't. I'll give another example, his famous dinner which he attended with Putin. It turns out that
I was there.
It turns out that straight after that dinner, the very first thing Flynn did was that he met with all the US intelligence community and went through a massive debriefing exercise and told them exactly what happened during that dinner. So in fact, he ticked all the right boxes, he did all the right things, but that was kept from the media. And it was all misrepresented to put him in the worst possible light. But as I said, Flynn is not coming back, I think.
No.
And perhaps, given, as I said, that his own ideas were, some of them were very good. I mean, he wanted, it seems, to reorganize the CIA and make changes to the way the CIA was run, which I would thoroughly approve of. But I mean, I think that he would not be able to come back whilst his case was ongoing. And I don't think that Trump has, the maneuver time to wait until the end of December to see what happens then. So it'll have to be someone else. But who it will be, I'm not going to guess. I mean, I really don't know. I think that Trump has a better idea of the sort of people he can work with now than he did in 2017. I think the shock of the Flynn dismissal has now passed. I think Russiagate is essentially over, and in fact is now swinging to Trump's advantage, with Horowitz's report shortly to come out, with a damning report on Comey from Horowitz already having come out. So I think Trump is in a stronger political position to pick the people he wants, and is much more experienced and knowledgeable about Washington politics than he was then. But who it's going to be, I'm not going to try and guess, because any kind of guess I make is probably going to be wrong. And I can speak, name names of people whom I would like it to be, but somehow I don't think it's going to be any of those people.
As long as it's not Nikki Haley. Throwing her name in the ring. As long as it's not Nikki Haley.
No, she's going to be.
You're watching this stream.
It's going to be. Pence is going to be out. Nikki Haley is going to be on the ticket.
Oh God, that's even worse. That's even worse. So guys, let's get
my prediction. I said it a lot when she resigned from the UN, and I'm staying with my prediction.
Yeah.
Big picture. What does Trump need to do now, foreign policy wise? It does look like he's. It seems that he has more control of the situation post Russiagate than when he first started out. That's for sure. And I think putting Barr in as AG and some other moves that he's made kind of stabilizes his team a little bit. But what does he have to do now, regardless of who he puts in as NSA, foreign policy wise? You guys mentioned Iran. What about Venezuela? What about North Korea?
Yeah, that's going to be the lasting legacy.
There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, but that's the lasting legacy of Bolton, is because the places that Bolton brought American foreign policy, in Iran, in Venezuela, in North Korea, the treaties, is that if Trump changes course even a little bit, he's going to go through the same thing. He's a traitor to American foreign policy interests. The liberals, the biggest doubters of the national security state up until 3 years ago, are now going to be in lockstep. Okay, so this is why I keep stressing is that Bolton built it into the mix where Trump didn't have options. It's either total victory or perceived defeat. And you know how Trump sees the word defeat. So this is it's going to be very, very hard. It's going to be very hard to make some kind of meaningful adjustment. Now, meeting with the Iranian president on the sidelines of the United Nations, that would be a good move. But we all know that there's a whole industry of Iran hating in the Beltway. Okay, so Trump's got to be really careful with that. All right, and with North Korea, where it's just, Pompeo is still around. The North Koreans don't even want to talk to Pompeo. He's not welcomed. All right, Trump's still in a very, very difficult situation, and I blame him for allowing it to happen. A lot of people have been saying this is what could happen, and it did happen. So he can't. Wanting to clean the slate in the wake of Bolton that's a near impossibility. He's going to have to find someone in there that can be a lot more nuanced, okay, instead of being a hammer in search of nails, okay, because that's what Bolton was all about. So he's going to need someone that's going to be a lot more flexible and finesse, where it doesn't look like Trump is caving in. And you know how Trump would react to that, okay? That's the missile attack against Syria, that's the only time one of the only times the liberal media cheered him, when he committed a gross violation of international law. All right. So this is not going to be easy, guys.
No, it's not going to be easy, but nonetheless, it's what he has to do. He's got to start diffusing the bombs that Bolton has left lying around all over the place.
Get into those, Alexander.
First of all, the first thing.
INF, Venezuela, Peter mentioned a lot as well. Let's look at.
Okay, let's start with the INF. He's got to move forward. He's got to now start revisiting the question of arms control with the Russians, and that is extremely important, because the United States is overall military position, it may come as a shock to some people, is actually deteriorating, because what Bolton has achieved is to land the United States in a arms race with both the Chinese and the Russians at the same time. So he's got to start talking to one or other, or preferably both, the Chinese and the Russians, on arms control. The Russians are the easier people to talk to. First of all, he's got to move towards getting START 2 extended. I mean, that shouldn't be difficult. The Russians have already said that they're open to extending START 2. That's the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which has already set limits on what the US and Russia can have as strategic weapons. He's also going to have to reinforce these commitments that he's given, or that the US has given, but which nobody believed under Bolton, that there will be no deployments of intermediate range nuclear missiles in Europe. And I think that means an early summit with Putin, just to discuss arms control. Secondly, he's got to talk to Rouhani. I think this meeting in New York at the General Assembly is a good idea. I don't expect anything realistic to come of it, but it's certainly a good idea. The third thing he's got to do is he's got to act on what he decided to do last year, but which Bolton stopped him from doing, which is pulling US troops out of Syria. There's a whole garrison in Al Tanf, which is near the Jordanian border, which is doing nothing, but is just creating problems with the Syrians. There's this blockade of Syria, which isn't working, this attempt to stop Iranian oil exports reaching Syria. Well, in fact, the Iranian oil tanker we were hearing so much about, which was stopped in Gibraltar by the British, it left Gibraltar, sailed on to Syria, and has unloaded its oil in Syria. So that wasn't working either. So he's got to end this war in Syria fast, try and improve relations with Erdogan, which means end this crisis with the Kurds, which again isn't achieving anything. Its only effect is to prolong a war in Syria, which, in terms of it being a regime change war, has already been lost. And last but not least, I think he's got to restart talks with the North Koreans. And the North Koreans came away very angry after the debacle of the Hanoi summit. They've now started testing missiles all over again. They've not yet gone all the way to testing the really big intercontinental range missiles, which would have been an extraordinary provocation. So they're still open to talks, but I think that Trump needs to start talking to them again. And that may mean, by the way, talking with the Chinese, because it's the Chinese who have the greatest leverage there. So there's lots of things he can do. I mean, there are lots of bombs, as I said, lying around. He can start diffusing them. I don't think he'd experience that much damage, political damage, if he met with Rouhani at the UN, if he met with Putin specifically on arms control, to negotiate a new arms control treaty. Heavens knows, even the New York Times is now saying that a rapprochement with Russia is necessary. Even President Macron is saying it. So he can actually, he's got some political...
The very topic of tomorrow's crosstalk. That's what I'm doing tomorrow. Okay. But the thing, I agree with Alexander McCurris. Yes. What is the nuanced answer to Christopher's question is that you need someone that knows how to work the bureaucracy and at the same time sell it to the media. That's a tough one, okay? Because the media is, whatever Trump proposes, the liberal media is going to be against. You need someone that is very savvy about working the bureaucracy. Trump wanted troops out of Syria. What happened? The bureaucracy just didn't react to it, okay? Taking away John Brennan's security clearance. He still has it.
Yeah.
because nobody in the bureaucracy enacted.
Can you explain that a little bit, Peter? The
decision.
bureaucracy for me and for the viewers. Explain what you mean by the bureaucracy. Do you mean the deep state? Do you mean something bigger?
I mean, actually, people that deal with arms control. Okay, I mean, are the people in the arms control bureaucracy? Are they prototypes of Bolton? I mean, people like Bolton want to get out of all of these treaties. Okay, they want to have a free hand. All right. And if Trump says, it's renegotiate or extend the START treaty, I mean, is he going to have someone in place at the National Security Council to actually force people to start moving in that direction? I mean, you can say all these kind of things. I want to end wars, but if you don't have the people around you to start enacting it, all right, then it's not going to happen. And that's exactly what's happened for 3 years. And it's even worse than that.
Yes,
it's gone in the opposite direction.
Exactly.
Right? And Trump has to own up to his own foreign policy. Okay, yes. A couple more news cycle, blame Bolton, fine, but that's not going to be the remedy.
Exactly. I mean, Peter's absolutely right. I mean, the fact of the matter is, President Trump, he may be the president of the United States, but he can't do things by himself. He has to have people who will follow his orders, because if they simply ignore his orders, then what he wants won't happen. And Syria is the perfect example. Trump made it very clear last year that he wanted US troops pulled out of Syria. That was his policy. Apparently, there was even an executive order. What happened? Not only did the troops remain in Syria, but an official was placed in charge of Syrian policy, who was even more hawkish and even more determined to achieve regime change in Syria. And we ended up with an even tighter policy, with an even stronger blockade of Syria. So the policy that Trump wanted, we had the contrary policy actually being implemented. So you have to have people within the bureaucracy who, when they receive an order from the president, will actually carry it out.
Alexander, are they not supposed to work for the pleasure of the president? That's why I have a hard time squaring the circle. What you're saying is that if you're the CEO of this company and you give an order, you expect people to carry out that order. So how does it work where you say Trump wanted out of Syria, but Bolton overruled him? And this kind of ties into Peter, talking about the bureaucracy. Is this thing so chaotic that Trump just can't get a handle on it? And people are, just saying, okay, president, we'll do this. And they just leave the room and they say, screw that guy, just keep the troops there.
Can I make a general observation? I mean, one of the stories that I have been following throughout my life as somebody who follows the news, is how the United States government has become steadily more dysfunctional. We've gone from a situation in the 50s where President Eisenhower ran a very tight ship, and the bureaucracy was extremely tightly controlled, carried out, and very responsive to the president's instructions, to a situation now when it has become a sprawling monster.
You could also, I agree with this line of thinking. I mean, look at the foreign policy of Richard Nixon. I mean, that was a tight ship. Really tight ship, because he had Henry Kissinger, and Henry Kissinger had a lot. I mean, not that I'm agreeing with what Kissinger did, but I mean, when decisions were made, they were implemented, because that was a really powerful National Security Council. For the first time, it really overshadowed the State Department. And so that was a lean and mean operation. Yes. And whatever you want to think of Richard Nixon, he had some sterling foreign policy successes. Yes. That unfortunately are not well remembered because of Watergate. I mean, what Trump really needs is someone like someone that has the aptitude and the abilities of Henry Kissinger. I'm not defending Kissinger's policies, okay, but as a political operator, they can signal what the president wants, because to date we haven't had that.
No, he needs a loyal national security advisor, and he needs a loyal chief of staff. He hasn't had much of either up to now. But, and he also needs to be consistent about what he wants, and he needs to be ready to sack people who don't do what he says, because that's the other thing. If people are not afraid, all authority in any organization has to have behind it a certain sense of fear. People have to say to themselves, well, if I don't do what the president wants, my job may be on the line. And that hasn't really been there up to now in the Trump administration. Trump has sacked lots of people, but he's never done it in a really structured way, and he's never had a coherent policy. Now, I think perhaps he might be starting to edge that way, because though Trump has never had a foreign policy plan, I think that's absolutely clear now. What he has had, I think, is, if you like, a certain sense of direction. He's not particularly wanted more wars. He wants to concentrate more on the United States. He sees China as the adversary, not the partner, and he doesn't want to, and he also understands at some level that he needs to try and create, or wants to create, some kind of distance between China and Russia. So it's not a plan, it's not coherent, but it's never been implemented in any way because the administration hasn't been working properly. So he's now got to start working towards that objective. And it's going to be difficult to do, given how dysfunctional the US bureaucracy has become. I mean, if you look at this extraordinary situation in Syria, we have the United States still persisting in a regime change operation in Syria, has been building up the Kurds in Syria, and as a result, it's antagonized its most important ally in the region, which is Turkey. That doesn't make very much sense, antagonizing Turkey to achieve a regime change in Syria, which is now absolutely clear is going to happen. So you've got to start thinking these things through. Be prepared to face down the clack in the media, the commentariat, who are always going to talk about the fact that you're betraying someone or other, and betraying the Kurds or betraying the Syrians or betraying the people in Iran or whatever it is. You've got to be prepared to face them down. And my own view about this is that the American people are very tough-minded about foreign policy. I think they may not understand all its nuances, but at the end of the day, if they are persuaded by the president that what he's doing is in the interests of the United States, they will go along with it, and they won't pay much attention to the Max Boots and all those sort of people.
Yeah, and the thing is, let's take another example. Elliott Abrams, it's, of Contra, the Iran-Contra scandal. Okay, shame, not fame, shame. Yeah. And Trump allowed all these Western Hemisphere foreign policy to be outsourced. Yeah. I mean, do you think that Donald Trump even knew who Elliott Abrams was? I doubt it. And again, an important position was just farmed out, and you have this Elliott Abrams, who should be in prison, being Trump's shaker and mover in the Western Hemisphere. I mean, no wonder Trump is exasperated. I mean, these people, you said you could do this, okay? I'm glad they didn't pull it off. Yeah. But see, at the end of the day, it's his responsibility, and he has to be much more responsible. And the people that are in his administration. I mean, the buck stops at the president's desk, okay? Harry Truman, all right? So I hope that this catastrophic 3 years is something he has learned from, because again, we almost stress almost every single time in our podcast, this issue, the issue of non-intervention, it may not have a plurality, but it has enough traction with enough people that can turn an election, okay? And Trump knows that, and he has to correct it.
Good point. Guys, before we get to the super chats, we have a few super chats that we need to answer here. I want to just maybe take 5-10 minutes to get your guys' thoughts on the CIA Russian spy CNN story. We have a video going up on that this afternoon, but there are a lot of YouTube videos on it. A lot of people are covering it, especially on YouTube. And I believe that Fox News also covered it, Peter. I think Tucker Carlson covered it, as well as Laura Ingraham. But I want to get your guys' take on this story because, I mean, it is a ridiculous story coming out of fake news CNN, but I want to hear it from Peter Lavelle and Alexander Mercouris. Alexander, I know we have that video, so your explanation is kind of a prologue to the video that we did. But, you know, guys, let's talk about that story for 5-10 minutes, and then we'll get to the super chat.
Right, well, first of all, I mean, the CNN story is a load of nonsense. I mean, this idea that they had to extract this super important spy because Donald Trump was blurting out classified information to the Russians in a meeting he had with Lavrov back in 2017 is absolute nonsense from start to finish. Can I just say, and we've discussed this in the video, at the time of that meeting with Lavrov, I and lots of other people were explaining that there was no leak of classified information at that meeting between Trump and Lavrov. As for this spy, the people who outed him were the US intelligence services themselves, who were working overtime to try to give credence to the Russiagate narrative by alleging that this spy had supposedly corroborated it in some form. And in fact, what we now know, because this is where the world has changed so radically in my lifetime, what we now know, because the Russians have provided all the information now about him, is that he cannot have corroborated the Russiagate narrative because the post he had in the Russian government as a advisor, as an assistant to Yuri Ushakov, who is a Putin foreign policy aide, is not one which would have put him in a position where he could have accessed that kind of information, assuming that information even existed, which it almost certainly did not. I mean, this is one of the bizarre things about this story, which is that we've learned an awful lot more about the spy from the Russians than we have from the Americans. And the American claim that this was some sort of super spy has turned out to be untrue. Now, last thing to say about it is that, of course, it from up to my mind, proves something else, which is that there's been this constant assumption, talk in Russia, that the Russian government is riddled with CIA plants, a fifth column, and all that sort of thing. I've never given it any credence. If this man, Oleg Smolenkov, to give him his name, really was the top American agent within the Russian government, then all I can say is there aren't any important agents inside the Russian government, because this man was not anybody of any importance. Over to you, Peter.
Well, I think that the fact that the CIA put out a statement about it, I cannot recall the CIA ever doing such a thing, going to the media and basically trashing a CNN story. I mean, that is very serious, because they usually, in my lifetime, I've never heard of it happening. No. So I think that they really wanted to shut that down. Again, I mean, it's just CNN just gasping at straws, trying to find something. They see Russiagate is never going to be over, unfortunately. It's part of the landscape right now. So what they're going to do is going to take any kind of story, however bizarrely connected or disconnected, and they're just going to continue with this narrative, because that is, you know, someone asked me what explains the longevity of Russiagate. That is one of the glues that keeps all of the disparate elements of the left together. They all believe in the conspiracy, even though there's no facts. They still believe in the conspiracy, because how else could have Donald Trump got elected president? See, they can't let it go. So instead of dispensing with it, they just keep adding layers to it. Yeah. Which don't make any sense at all. I mean, I was reading Stephen Cohen had a fantastic piece a few days ago that made it into Zero Hedge. It's a wonderful line. He said, "There's not much Russia in Russiagate." No. Okay? There's very little about Russia in Russiagate.
I mean, I would add to that, Peter, that it wasn't just the CIA that trashed the CNN story. It was also the New York Times.
Yeah, they came up, yeah.
No friend of Donald Trump. But I mean, they made the absolutely obvious point, which is that the discussions to get this, well, the attempts to get this man to agree to leave Russia actually began in 2016 when Barack Obama was still president. So it was long before this meeting between Donald Trump and Lavrov, which CNN was talking up in this crazy fashion. To my mind, what it proves, by the way, is the extraordinary way that these awful people, Brennan, Comey, all of them, they still have McCabe, they still have in this affair, because I have no doubt that this story ultimately has its source with people like that. Because I mean, they went along to CNN, they made this absolutely nonsensical claim that this hugely important spy had somehow been compromised or endangered by Trump, and that this is why he was pulled out. And we see the CIA instantly contradicting it, and we see the New York Times writing a long article to refute it. So the CNN is on its own with this one. And I think it should, well, retract that story. Not, of course, that
Well, they never do. But, you know, it's food for thought here. 10 major former Obama-era officials now populate in CNN and MSNBC. Think about that. We have a fusion of the deep state and the liberal media. And another point here that's so important that very rarely is it brought up. Donald Trump, as president of the United States, can declassify any information he damn well pleases. So there is no security breach. He has the authority as president of the United States to release information as he wishes. And I wish he would release a lot more.
Yes.
All right, let's get to some super chats and wrap it up, this live stream. Kenneth Boyd, $5 super chat. Thank you for that. Brave New Perth, super chat. Peter, is certain aspects of Russian foreign policy Eurasianism in building greater Eurasia?
Well, you know, I've always kind of stayed away from the term Eurasianism because I'm not really sure what that means. What is very, very clear, and it is one policy decision that Boris Yeltsin made when he was president, and believe me, he didn't make very many good ones. But what he decided was, instead of seeing China as an adversary, is to start seeing it as a partner. And so what we have now through all the Eurasian land space is a partnership, a Russian-Chinese partnership, and to develop this huge land tract. You know, it's absolutely massive, and it has so much economic potential. It really will be the engine of global growth in the decades to come. And so if you talk about the integration of the Eurasian landmass, well, we have the Belt and Road Initiative, which Russia has embraced, and it's going all the way into Europe. It's all through Asia, obviously, going into Africa. So the integration, and this is something that the U.S. is mantic about. I mean, Hillary Clinton, she made it very clear that the Ukraine had to be flipped into the Western orbit because of this consolidation of the Eurasian landmass. And in Ukraine's role in it, there was a role in it. And what it was going to do is to create tension across the Eurasian landmass through this illegal coup in February of 2014. So the West, particularly the United States, is terrified of the integration of Eurasia. And it is happening at a pace that Western media has no clue about. Okay, It is massive, and the infrastructure that is being built, millions of people being brought out of poverty, millions of people being brought into the world trade system. It's really a remarkable thing that's happening that doesn't get any coverage because people are talking about Stormy Daniels or something like that. It really is astounding. There's so much is happening in parts of the world that the Western media just has no interest in at all. And that is one of the reasons why people like Bolton don't want to get out of Afghanistan, get out of Syria, because Iran is playing a new and a massive role in this process as well. I mean, what's the number, Alexander McKeers? I think you know the number, like $200 billion investment, Chinese investment into the Iranian economy. That isn't a pocket change. That's real. Okay, and it's all part of China's vision for the Eurasian landmass. Integration, okay? And integration through trade and economics and finance. None of this regime change nonsense.
Can I just say, I think what people need to understand or need to distinguish is that there is a political philosophy which has some circulation in Russia, but amongst a fairly small number of people, called Eurasianism. And then there is the foreign policy of the Russian government, and the two are not the same. Eurasianism, which is associated especially with Alexander Dugin, is, I mean, it's an idea. It has its threads going all the way back before the First World War. There was a man then called Baron Rosen, who was a foreign policy official, who was already talking about Russia, focusing on its own region and being distinct from Europe. And this was taken up by a man called Lev Gumilyov in the 1920s, who developed these ideas even further. And now Dugin has put his own spin on them. But the Russian government, its own foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, wrote about 2 years ago a lengthy article, which you can still find on the Russian Foreign Ministry's website, in which he actually disagreed with these ideas. He said that these are not really ideas that make a great deal of sense for Russia, and that Russia does not see itself as being this kind of very distinctive civilization, Eurasianist civilization, that people like Dugin and Gumilyov and Rosen have been talking about. So we have a process which Peter has described very well, of China and Russia forming an economic and trading and security, increasingly security and foreign policy and political partnership, because they've got two very compatible economies, and they see the world in very similar terms, and they say to each other, well, let's trade with each other and let's build up our relations. And you have all sorts of states around these two giants that are integrating themselves with them. So you see Iran being drawn into the system, possibly Turkey eventually, and all of that. But I've also been in a room where I've heard Vladimir Putin himself say that the Europeans are welcome to join in. And that is very distinct and different from the Eurasianism of Dugin and Gumilyov and Rosen and the others. It's saying not that Russia is different, so different that, we can't really mix with these places, the Europeans, because we are so radical, we're a completely different cultural mix. It's a pragmatic policy which says, let's all trade together, let's all work together, China, Russia, Europe, and let's make together a land bridge which will join us all up, and we'll all trade, and we'll all be much richer together. And let's all accept that we all have our differences, but we have compatibilities also. So it's a very different thing, and it needs to be understood in a very different way. People should not make the mistake of thinking that Dugin has any great influence in the Russian government. He doesn't. And as I said many times, the Russian government is actually opposed to him. He has some influence on the fringes, but he is not the tremendous guru, the philosopher king who's guiding Russian foreign policy in any way. The reality is the diametric opposite.
Okay, super chat from Brave New Perth. Alexander, what is NATO and Russia's political, economic, and military strategy within the Arctic?
Well, I mean, I think the Russians, who, let's remember, have by far the biggest Arctic coastline of any of the Arctic states. And Russia is also, of course, a very northerly power. People forget the extent to which Russia is, in fact, a northern country itself. The Russians are very keen on developing the resources of the Arctic. I mean, the area is very rich in oil, gas, all kinds of strategic minerals. It's got this huge coastline. It's got, as the seas thaw, because of climate change, is becoming more accessible. And of course, it's also a potential sea bridge so that, ships laden with, all kinds of goods and merchandise and freight, can increasingly plausibly travel along the Arctic coast to Europe from China and from the Far East. So from the Russians, it makes good sense to develop this region. And what is now happening, and this is so typical, I think, of the way that NATO thinks, is that it sees this entirely natural development by the Russians of what is ultimately their own country and their own coastline as some kind of vast, dangerous, strategic threat. And the fact that the Russians are now very close to the Chinese and that they're inviting the Chinese to act as partners in some of this is also seen as some kind of great strategic threat. And so a economic and commercially driven development by the Russians of their own economy is now being used as a further excuse to start a militarization process in the Arctic itself. Now, it's crazy, it's entirely damaging, and of course it pitches NATO in an arms race in the Arctic, which is not only incredibly dangerous and incredibly destabilizing, but it is done in a region where the Russians, and ultimately the Chinese, because they're working with the Russians, hold all the high cards. So it makes no sense. It's bad from every single point of view.
It's just another perfect example of NATO in search of a mission. Oh, we have to protect the Arctic. Oh, that's our mission now in 2019, 2020. I mean, this is so pathetic. It's so pathetic. Here you have a region of the world that is not militarized. Why don't everybody get together and say, let's keep it that way?
Exactly.
Let's work together on this. Exactly. Russia's held in numerous conferences and summits about this and how to carefully protect but exploit the natural resources of the Arctic. And then the US is talking about this as a Russian threat. What? Huh?
Yeah. I mean, Russia is an Arctic country. I mean, 40% of the Arctic is Russian territory. So for Russia to develop its own territory is its sovereign right. It's also its duty to its own people. It is not a threat to Canada or America or Britain or Norway or any of these other places. By the way, I should add, for what it's worth, that Norway, which is also an Arctic power, and Russia have historically had rather good relations.
Yes. And they've had a joint oil and gas exploration. Norwegian companies always been very welcomed in Russia. Yeah. And then because of this fake Russia hoax, puts a lot of pressure on those companies and face sanctions and whatnot. I mean, again, just a complete nonsense. All right. Yes. The Arctic is an opportunity. It shouldn't be an opportunity for confrontation.
No.
Peter, super chat from Irish and Tired. Could a U.S. president retool the arms industry for peaceful purposes? Does finance hold all the reins?
The sad fact of the matter is that for a small number of people, it is an amazingly lucrative industry. All right. I mean, and this is one of the things I find as an American, very shameful that the United States sees arms sales is, that's going to be a job creator and all of this type of stuff here. I think that, unfortunately, and Eisenhower pointed right, the military-industrial complex, I mean, it has a mind of its own. And we've seen presidents from Eisenhower, and he said it for a reason, because he said there's something to worry about. It is a threat to America's way of life, and it's gotten only worse. Mm-hmm. Taking on the military-industrial complex is very, very difficult to do. Not impossible, because if you can connect public opinion and correct policies, it could work. But then you have people like in the media and all of these think tanks. They're not think tanks. These are propaganda tanks, okay? They propagandize policy options for their benefit and for their benefactors, okay? They're not doing, this is not thinking soberly about problems. No, they're all agitating for policy that enriches themselves and the people that fund these think tanks. All right, look at the Atlantic Council. I mean, it's all it is the propaganda arm of NATO. All right, and the Washington Consensus. And you know, do you think that they are interested in the natural good of the environment of working people? No, they're not. None of these things are important. It's the bottom line. It's their careers. I mean, all these. Look at these people. Their whole life, you know, they've just been bureaucratic tapeworms. Okay, living off the largesse. And what we can, you see, if you fail, you can easily come back. Look at Elliott Abrams. I mean, that's shameful. And they come right back in. So, you know, one of the things I've always really lamented, because I've lived abroad most of my life, not adult life, my entire life. If Americans only knew, okay, how policy is made and how it's projected abroad. You know, most people don't know it in the United States because, what was it? Somebody told me once that something like only 17% of news broadcasts in a week even touch foreign policy. You know, the outside world largely doesn't exist in the American psyche. It really doesn't. I mean, the three of us here, we're just political junkies. We think about these things all the time, but most people, the vast majority of people, don't think about it because they're not informed about it.
Yeah. Can I just answer if I can just come back to this? I mean, the Russian and Chinese arms industries are state-owned. If the Russian and Chinese governments want to get their defense industries to start producing more civilian goods than military goods, then they are in a position to make them do that.
To do so, yes.
Exactly. I mean, and by the way, that has happened historically in the past. It's not something that is, you know, unheard of. Both in China and Russia, the defense industries do produce lots of civilian goods and can always be asked to produce more. In the United States, the defense industries are privately owned, but they are also in this very, very strange symbiotic relationship with the Pentagon. And they will always make far more money by producing arms, far more profits from producing weapons than they will producing civilian goods, because the nature of defense procurement in the United States is that it is much more profitable for defense companies to actually provide military goods than civilian ones.
Even if they don't work. Even if they don't
work. So what unfortunately happens is that they recycle some of these profits, these enormous profits they make, into these huge lobbying machines, which work within the Pentagon itself, where there's this revolving door between military officers and the defense industries. So, you know, an American general, after he retires, will go off and work for Lockheed, for example, and that's absolutely standard. And of course, in Congress, and that has created what Eisenhower referred to as the military-industrial complex, this strange symbiotic creature, which essentially is based very heavily on US tax dollars. It would be extraordinarily difficult for a president to break that and to force these companies to go from doing something that they find very profitable, which is producing arms, to something which would be far less profitable for them, which is producing civilian goods. Now, I'm not saying it is impossible. Nothing is impossible, but it would require a radical change in the American national psyche and in the way Congress works for it to happen. One day, perhaps it will, but I can't see it happening anytime soon.
Yeah, it just as a fun exercise, take a look at all of the former secretaries of defense and all of their deputies. This say last 30 years. How many of them worked for defense companies? A huge number of them. Yes. A huge number. Yes. And so, you know, when they go in, and it's really interesting because let's say someone that comes in that used to make tanks. Okay, they were like an executive at a tank factory. Okay, and then they make it into the Pentagon. There's always the other branches of the military are always very nervous and jealous because they know that they're going to throw the money to their former employer. Okay, it has nothing to do with what is necessary for national defense. But that's an afterthought. It's how you can enrich your buddies. Oh, and by the way, you probably still have shares in the company. Okay, it's so corrupt. It's so intensely corrupt.
It's very corrupt. It's also economically, can I just say, very damaging, because of course what it is doing is that it is distracting the US from civilian manufacturing, in which historically it excelled, into arms manufacturing, where, by the way, it has always been far less successful. American weapons, I'm going to say it, are always overcomplicated and vastly overpriced. So one of the reasons why the United States, which is essentially a self-sufficient economy, continuously runs a major deficit in manufactured goods is because so much of its industrial economy is tied up producing these very, very expensive and overpriced and overcomplicated defense goods. If you go way back to the 1960s, when there was the famous crisis over gold, one of the reasons why why the United States had to come off the gold standard, it's not widely known, is because it was involved at that time in an arms race at the strategic level with the Soviet Union, and it was also pouring out weapons to fight the Vietnam War. And the result was that it wasn't producing enough civilian goods to keep its trade in balance. Its trade, therefore, with the Europeans, who were in those days the big industrial producers, the industrial competitors, began to go into deficit. The Europeans then started demanding payment in gold. And the United States went from a situation where in the mid-1950s, its gold reserves were something like 20,000 metric tons. They fell to 8,000 metric tons. Some of that gold is of very poor quality because it is reminted gold coins. And the United States wasn't able to sustain that deficit any longer with gold payments, with the result that in 1971, it had to move off the gold standard. It had to stop.
We're all Keynesians now.
Exactly. So the defense industries and the way that the United States is basically, it's military industries, how this stranglehold over the American economy is one of the reasons why we are in this fiat currency system that so many people talk about and worry about today.
Okay, super chat from Penguins fan Alexander. Bolton fired. Will Trump withdraw from Syria? Update on Idlib, Syria.
Well, I sincerely hope he does. I mean, that as we've discussed in this program, is one of the first steps that Donald Trump should take. I mean, he announced last year that US troops would be withdrawn from Syria, and it never happened. In fact, they were reinforced, apparently, the number of US troops. And we were told that they were going to, firstly, we were told that they were all going to be withdrawn. Then we were told that their numbers were going to be reduced. And then without any public statement or decision from the president, their number actually increased. and
a deployment without purpose. Okay, look in search of a mission.
Exactly. And we also had this attempt to blockade Syria and to prevent oil reaching Syria. And we had attacks on oil convoys crossing Iraq, American airstrikes on oil convoys crossing Iraq. And a year ago, we had threats of airstrikes by the US military if the Syrian army launched an offensive in Idlib. So all of these things, all contradicting the president's own foreign policy. Now, Bolton is gone. He's known to have been the person who was driving this thing. This is Donald Trump's chance to finally bring this war, which, to be clear, has already been lost, to an end.
As in Afghanistan.
We are not going to have regime change in Syria. That's not going to happen. And that would mean pulling out the US troops in Syria, allowing the Syrians and the Kurds and the Turks to sort things out. And that might even result in a sustained improvement in relations between the United States and Turkey, which, by the way, over the last few weeks have actually got a little less bad. Now, will that happen? Well, it's Donald Trump's call. It seems to me that he does have that particular space. Now, what has happened in Syria? We've had the Syrian offensive in the south. Khan Sheikhun has been captured or recaptured or liberated by the Syrian army. The Syrian army has paused. There's been a Turkish redeployment in the north. As I've always said, this is going to be an incremental thing. I am absolutely sure, I remain of this view, that by the end of this year, Idlib will be under full Syrian government control. This pause is not going to last for very long. If Donald Trump uses the political space that the sacking of Bolton has provided him wisely, then that is going to happen even faster. And we will see Idlib back under Syrian control within weeks. But it all depends on Donald Trump.
Okay, Peter, super chat from Penguins fan. What about TYT, Young Turks, smearing Tulsi Gabbard?
What do you expect from those guys? The Young Turks are just, they're fake opposition. They're fake resistance, okay? They're just another arm of the mainstream media, okay? I mean, I remember so very well during, I don't remember which convention it was, Democrat or Republican, that they had live coverage of it. And Jank started with Russia. And that was the last time except for election night, which I really enjoyed watching them melt down. That was really great television, and really shameful. But I don't take the Young Turks very seriously. Like I said, they want to be an alternative to the mainstream, but they're part of the mainstream, and they have very narrow view on things. Okay, and I just don't take them seriously anymore. Thank goodness Jimmy Dore left. Okay, and started out on his own. A lot of other people left there that I think were kind of interesting, but don't watch Young Turks. What's the point?
Absolutely. I mean, the Young Turks, as far as I'm concerned, are fully mainstream. They're mainstream on almost everything, or to be more precise, on everything that really matters. And the fact that Tulsi Gabbard is the real resistance is the reason why the fake resistance opposes her, because this so-called resistance isn't really a resistance at all. Let's be absolutely clear about this. One of the great problems with the United States, and not just the United States, in the West today, is that there's been this utter corruption of language. So the establishment calls itself the resistance. In Britain, Boris Johnson, who's however incompetently and stupidly is trying to implement a referendum result, is called a dictator. A parliament that is obstructing him is called the defenders of democracy. Yeah. I mean, we have all of this.
It's very Orwellian, yeah.
I mean, as I said, we have a use of language now, which should be. Language has lost. It's no longer being used properly, and that is always a very bad thing.
Yeah, like Planned Parenthood. Yeah. Yeah, they're an abortion factory. They call them. They're not planning any families, are they? No, it's a perversion of the language.
Yeah. But what did Don Lemon say? He said, "It's in the name, Antifa, anti-fascist." That's why they're anti-fascist. It's in the name.
Limon.
Oh boy. All right. Super chat from Brave New Perth. Alexander, did China bankroll Russia's annexation of Crimea? The signing of the Power of Siberia mega project in May 2014, Chinese involvement in 4 concrete energy projects managed by leading Russian energy companies.
The answer is no. I mean, those projects were clearly under discussion long before the crisis in Ukraine and Crimea took off. The Chinese have never bankrolled the Russians. That's a complete misunderstanding of the nature of the relationship. The Russians and the Chinese have been talking about building pipelines to each other, building pipelines from Russia to China for many, many years. There were lots of problems sorting out those pipelines. Most of those problems, by the way, as I understand it, came from the Russian side.
Absolutely.
Gazprom and the other big Russian energy majors had been very, very heavily committed to the European market. And they were very skeptical about tying up with the Chinese market, which they didn't really take very seriously. In fact, and Peter is in a much better position to discuss this than me, but I can still remember, you went to Russia 10 years ago, and it was very, very difficult to get many people in Russia to take the relationship with China seriously.
Yeah.
And
then the major issue with the energy relationship that they finally agreed upon is that the Chinese wanted to be the sole importer of Russian oil and gas. And Russia said, no, that's a national security risk for us. We have to diversify. So diversifying it to and it's still planned to go through North Korea, to service South Korea, to Japan. They wanted a diversity of customers, because you never want to have one customer, because you're in a very precarious position if you have one single customer. But if you have a variety, then you have a lot more power to negotiate. So absolutely. I mean, it was way even before my career in television. I remember I was in equity research in Russia, and we were watching these pipeline talks, and it's been a good 15 years. So absolutely. way before Crimea.
Absolutely. I mean, can I just say, one of the things a lot of people, I think, don't appreciate is how focused on its relationship with the West and Europe Russia for a very long time was. I mean, if you'd gone to Russia in, say, 2005, 2010, it's very, very difficult to get Russian business people and Russian companies to even think about China. China was this faraway place. Yes, it was doing very well, and maybe we can learn something from them. But ultimately, it was the United States and Europe that the Russian business leaders were really interested in, and Russian business people were entirely focused on. And it just wasn't possible at that time to get them really interested in China. And I'm going to say something else. I went to China in 2017, and I found the same thing there from the other side. At that time, Chinese business people were entirely focused on the United States. It's very, very difficult for that get them to take Russia seriously in those days. I mean, they were quite well disposed to Russia from a political view, but they didn't think of Russia in those days as an economic partner. Now, I haven't been to China since 2017, but I've heard that there's been a huge sea change over the last year, which is hardly surprising. And now the Chinese business people are suddenly taking Russia much more seriously than they once did, because they've seen this turn against them from the United States.
Yeah, and importantly, if we go into high tech as well, is that it seems in the cards that they'll be sharing operating systems for mobile telephones and telecommunications. I mean, we did a video on this. I mean, we're going to look at this division of the world, and you'll work on one platform that will not be compatible with the other. Okay.
Yes.
And this is happening. This is happening apace too.
Exactly.
And it's something we're keeping a very close eye on. It wasn't inevitable that China and Russia would work so closely together. That was the making. This is the makings of the West. They're the ones that pushed them together, and they found out it's a pretty good relationship.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. Peter's got it exactly so. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would also say Russia's annexation of Crimea. When we were talking about words, maybe.
Well, indeed.
Well, I mean,
maybe you could say Crimea's accession.
Yeah, but see,
when
people say annexation, you have to look up the meaning of annexation in terms of international law. An annexation is taking over land through the use of force, like the Golan Heights. Okay, that's an illegal annexation. Okay, and so Crimea returned to Russia. That
Yes.
Crimea was part of Russia before the United States was even a country.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so annexation is it's a cheap word for people that don't know what they're talking about, and it's politically motivated. Okay, ask the people of Crimea, were they annexed?
No.
They won't say that at all.
No.
They'll say we returned to Russia.
Yes.
Okay, super chat from Penguins fan Peter. Iran oil tanker, did it arrive in Syria?
I don't know where it arrived to.
It did. The answer.
It
The
did?
I
answer
think it was heading to Turkey at one point.
Yeah, but the Iranians have confirmed that it did. It unloaded all its oil in Syria, so it all ultimately went to Syria. So that's so all that fire and fury about this tanker. In the end, it ended up with nothing, because, as I said, that was exactly where it was always going to go, and that was where it ended up. And can I make it very, very clear that there are no EU sanctions to prohibit oil being delivered to Syria?
Yep.
Okay, Alexander, Hong Kong, will China intervene to end this crisis? A super chat from Penguins fan.
Well, I've often wondered, and it seems not, at least not for the moment. I've come to the conclusion that the Chinese authorities were prepared to intervene in China, in Hong Kong, but that they ran into resistance from the Hong Kong government. I think that's now become absolutely clear, and that the Hong Kong government was itself leveraging these protests in order to get the Chinese to agree to have this extradition treaty blocked, because there's lots of very, very powerful people in Hong Kong who don't want an extradition treaty between Hong Kong and China. So we now have, again, this utterly anomalous situation where Hong Kong is part of China, but doesn't have an extradition agreement with mainland China, but it does have extradition agreements with Britain and the United States.
Okay. Peter, super chat from Penguins fan. Donald Tusk slamming Russia-Ukraine prisoner swap. Who the hell is this guy, and what's his problem?
Well, his name is Donald Tusk. Okay, everyone says it Tusk, but he's Tusk, he's Kashubin. He's a Kashubin, and that's a very small minority in Poland, and he comes from that small minority. A lot of their words that they use are actually German. Okay, so he's just a functionary. I always like to say, he's just a perfect example, poster child of elite capture. He gets this nice cushy EU job, and he'll just mimic whatever the EU line is. I mean, what business is it of his? And I lived in Poland for well over 10 years. I mean, Poland's love affair with Ukraine is completely vacuous and is disingenuous. Poles historically have not had a very high opinion of Ukrainians, and I'm being very, very diplomatic here. So again, this is just a cudgel. Look, Tusk wants Poland to get Fort Trump. Okay, I mean, Tusk sees the Germans telling the Americans, it's time for you to leave. The war has been over for 75 years. And the Poles would love to pick up the largesse. Okay, again, more divisions within the European Union on this. Okay, you're going to have countries like Poland that will want to take advantage of that. Living in Poland is one of the most pro-American countries in the world. It really is. It's extraordinary. Because as the joke goes, every Pole has an auntie in Chicago.
Yeah. Can I just say, this prisoner exchange is the first really hopeful sign that's come from the after the Zelensky presidential election victory. And I was starting to have concerns about Zelensky, and I still have lots of concerns about Zelensky and whether this is really going to go anywhere. But this is the first actually positive thing that has happened. And it's been very, very interesting to see who has not been happy about it. Donald Tusk, as Peter says, but there's been some very, very unhappy articles, for example, in the more anti-Russian fringes of the British media, Britain being also a very anti-Russian country, which had been extremely unnerved and unhappy about this prisoner exchange and the possibility that there could be a genuine rapprochement between the Russians and the Ukrainians, and that this conflict might actually be ending in ways that will actually bring Ukraine and Russia again closer together. Let us never forget that this whole conflict began as a result of a disastrous play by people like Donald Tusk, his foreign minister, Radek Sikorski, Carl Bildt in Sweden, and all kinds of other people, to try to detach Ukraine from Russia. So any sign that that policy is failing and that Ukraine and Russia are now engaging in a gradual rapprochement, and that this policy of trying to keep these two countries separated from each other is failing, is for them a failure of their policy and of their plan. Can I just add one other final thing, which is that there was one particular aspect of this exchange which has created huge anger amongst some people in Britain and in the West, which is that one of the people the Ukrainians handed over to the Russians was the former air defense chief of the Donetsk People's Republic, who was captured by the Ukrainians. Now, the Dutch have been saying that this individual was involved in the shoot down of MH17 and is a witness to that. And they were talking about extraditing him to the Netherlands. And so the fact that the Ukrainians, instead of doing that, have handed him over to the Russians, where he is beyond the reach of the Dutch and of the Western intelligence, Western countries, is something that has caused alarm bells very much to start ringing. I'm going to say something else, which is I think MH17 is another big and very, very sensitive story. And the fact, as I said, that the Ukrainians chose to hand this person over is perhaps a sign that, you know, we may be starting to edge ever so slowly towards getting the truth of what really happened to MH17.
And on top of that, so far, the Trump administration is withholding military aid, the latest tranche.
Absolutely.
So this is a lull, and it can go in any number of directions. I think there's a possibility where it could have a very positive trajectory. This is the first major move that Zelensky's made on this frontier, and it's a learning process, and it should be encouraged. All of these people that always look for confrontation because it's good for their careers, it's good for military budgets, it's all kinds of reasons that are not good, or they don't play a positive role, and it has nothing to do with the welfare of people on the ground.
Absolutely. Can I just say, I mean, we have, along with these positive moves by Zelensky, there's been some negative moves also. One of the ones that causes me real concern is that his interior minister, he's kept as the interior minister. Still there. Arsen Avakov, who is a absolutely demented anti-Russian hardliner, who has been he's steeped in blood during the Donbass war, and he was actually appointed to the post of interior minister not by Poroshenko, but by the acting president of Ukraine, a man called Turchinov, who was appointed directly after the Maidan coup. So he's the longest serving minister in the Ukrainian government. And I was very much hoping and expecting to see him go. And it's extremely concerning that he's still in post. So, you know, we mustn't assume that this conflict...
It also could be a case of keeping your enemies close, okay? It can be nuanced. I won't say anything definitive on it, though it is very unfortunate this character is still in a position of influence.
Absolutely, in a position of very great influence. But having said that, this prisoner exchange, is a very positive move, and it should be unequivocally welcomed. And the fact that people like Donald Tusk are unhappy about it is in itself a good sign.
All right. Super chat from Penguins fan. Update on South Africa xenophobic attacks on foreigners. Do you guys?
I'm sorry. There's been so much going on, especially obviously, as you can imagine, in Britain at the moment, but also in the United States. but I haven't really been following South Africa very well. So I'm going to have to give a pass on that one. At some point, it's a story that I really need to get on top of, but I'm not on top of it at the moment. Same with Kashmir, by the way. I mean, I'm just not on top of that story as of now.
It's been a busy week, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And the final super chat from Brave New Perth. Thanks for answering my questions. This was great. And we will end it on that note. This was great, a great live stream. Thank you to everyone that tuned in and watched us this morning, at least morning where I am. Where Peter is in morning where I was.
It's morning everywhere.
I'm afternoon.
Yeah, we're early afternoon. Alexander is edging towards the afternoon right now.
Yes.
So thank you to everyone that tuned in. Remember to hit that like button, share the channel with everybody you know. You can donate to us on PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribe Star. The link is in the description box down below. Thank you to everyone that sent us super chat questions and everyone that had questions in the live stream. We appreciate all that you guys do for us. And of course, you can go to the Duran shop and pick up some merchandise. Alexander has a promo. There you can see my magic mug.
My magic mug too.
Oh, you also have the magic mug.
I've been drinking coffee from it.
I've got water in mine, but I'm going to definitely get a coffee after this live stream. All right, Peter, what are you checking out this week?
Tomorrow we do a recording on is a rapprochement between Russia and the United States, Russia and Europe. We had a few days ago a remarkable event. I don't think it got enough coverage, where you had the French foreign minister and French defense minister visiting Moscow, visiting their counterparts, Lavrov and Shoigu, and it was a remarkable press advance approach. Excuse me. And it looked very sincere. At least Mr. Macron, maybe while he's got a mess at home, maybe he's trying to make himself a name as a peacemaker. If it can improve Europe's relations with Russia, then I'm all for it. Why not? Always look for where things work, and where things don't work, you have to work on them. Okay. So if Macron can spearhead this, good for him. It's good for everyone.
Yeah. Alexander, what are you looking at in the UK? Can't be anything Brexit related.
Well, anything can happen with Brexit, and I mean this is still a very volatile situation. I mean we have court cases galore. We've got to see what Boris Johnson is up to, what Jeremy Corbyn is going to do. I mean there's so much going to happen with Brexit that, as I said, obviously I have to follow this with great care, because it's my country, quite apart from anything else. I should say that transcending any question about Brexit itself, about remain or leave, whichever side you're on, I am becoming very, very worried about the state of the political situation in Britain. I mean, we now have a government here which can't function, a prime minister who's been boxed in, and a parliament which refuses to let him go and which won't dissolve itself. I mean, we are in a worse political trap or crisis than I've ever seen in my lifetime. And the only thing that gives me comfort is that while we have this total breakdown in Westminster itself, the rest of the country is calm. I mean, I was in the West Country, Western England, very beautiful area of England over the weekend, at the invitation of a very kind hostess who actually watches the Duran, I should say, and her husband. And I was traveling around England, and it was still the same calm, peaceful country that it's always been. Everything there working very normally, but in Westminster itself, we have chaos and impasse and breakdown. And as Peter the historian will confirm, always the greatest crises start with the crisis of the elite at the center.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the Moscow Times is calling the street protests in Moscow is pre-revolutionary. It's like, no. I mean, it's total exaggeration. And Alexander, when Alexander was saying that, I was waiting for you to say of the elites, and that's exactly right. Yes. Okay, because it is their livelihood, it's their prestige, it's their legacy. It's all about them. It's never about us. And it takes the mask off of really what it's all about. Okay.
Absolutely.
These people have nothing to do with a democratic process or a democratic ethos. Okay. Yes. This is just pure calculated self-interest for themselves. Okay.
Exactly.
The status quo works for them.
Exactly. But the great danger is that when you have a crisis of the elites, which is all we have at the moment, as I said, this is a stable country with a completely unstable, indeed, frankly, demented elite at the moment in extreme crisis. But where there is a crisis of the elite, always the worry is that that crisis will spill over and will start to involve larger sections of the country. There is no sign of that at the moment. As I said, England remains, Britain remains, and I want to make that very clear to people outside. It still remains a very orderly, peaceful, prosperous, good place, but not in London. So obviously I have to worry and watch all of that. But Peter's also absolutely right. The great question now over the next few weeks is what is going to happen with Bolton gone, with all this talk of rapprochement with Russia. What are we going to see? I mean, is this rapprochement with Russia that people are talking about, is it actually going to come to anything? What are they going to do? I mean, what are they actually going to say to the Russians that will actually break the ice? Because let's be absolutely clear about this. It is the West that has to move. The Russians are not going to move to the West. They've always had their door open, but it's the West that has to walk through that door.
All right. We will end it on that note. Alexander Mercurs, the Oracle of London in London. Thank you very much, Alexander. Peter Lavelle, the host of RT's Crosstalk in Moscow. Thank you very much, Peter. And thank you to everyone that tuned in. And remember to share the channel with everybody that you know. Hit that like button. Help us get to 100K subscribers. Take care, everybody.